tonight we've got some stories about the dangers of working the night shift. I don't think anyone here needs reminding, but these stories will certainly remind you to stay vigilant when it comes to strangers. Before we begin, if you think you might fall asleep, please introduce yourself in the comments, and while you're there, please like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm always interested in knowing what country everyone is from, so let us know in the comments and share what time it is where you are. Thank you once more for joining me. Get cozy, grab a glass of water, turn the lights off, and make sure you've locked your door. Don't forget to say hello in the comments. It's time to close your eyes. Many years ago, I used to work the night shift at a hotel in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. During the season, it wasn't too bad, mostly families and tourists. We had on-site security back then. However, in the off-season, the winter months were different. The cheap weekly rates we offer attracted a lot of creepy people. The idea was supposed to be to make money in the off-season by renting to snowbirds, older retired people who came to the beach for about a month through the winter. It did not always work out that way. The cheap rates made it possible for a less than desirable element to become long-term residents. I've discovered more than my fair share of meth labs, broken up physical assaults, and more during the winter months. Working the third shift, I would meet some interesting people. The cold weather would mean some homeless people would come in to get warm and grab some free coffee. I wasn't supposed to let them, but it's not in me to be cruel. I would let them grab a coffee and get warm for a minute, as long as they didn't cause trouble. As you can see, night shift in the winter made for some crazy and sometimes creepy stories. I have a lot, but this one is one that stands out because it didn't end well for me. I had a great night up to this point. I had gone to an indie wrestling show with my best friend before work. In fact, I had agreed to come in an hour early the next night for the young lady that worked the second shift, in exchange for her working an hour late for me. Ironically enough, I met Terry Funk that night, a wrestling legend known for his hardcore matches. Little did I know I was about to experience this kind of violence for real. I was supposed to be there at midnight, due to her working over an hour for me. I normally came in at 11 p.m. I counted the register, and she briefed me on her shift as to what had happened, as per usual. As she was leaving, my friend Andrew arrived. He worked second shift maintenance at this hotel, and the other two hotels our company owned. He would regularly stop by after work, go grab us some food, and we would play World of Warcraft on our laptops after eating for a while since business was slow. He was just getting my money for the food, getting ready to leave. I was excited, telling him about how much fun I had at the wrestling show and showing him my Terry Funk t-shirt that I was so proud of. I was just walking into the back office to put the shirt up when I heard the doorbell indicating a customer had entered. It's true what they say, ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. I had turned around when I heard someone say something loudly, but I still couldn't make out what they had said. I had just reached the doorway when I saw Andrew fall down in front of me. The next thing I know, a guy walks around the corner and punches me in the head with a short steel pipe in his hand. It staggered me, and I fell to the ground. Before I could react, he hits me in the head with the pipe. I suddenly heard another guy that I hadn't even noticed. He was panicking because he thought that one of us had ran to get a cop. They left out the door. I was finally able to get to my feet. I tried to call the police from the phone in the back office, but it was having issues. I slammed it in frustration. I was hurting and scared, really freaking out. I realized that they could come back, so I ran and locked the door. I didn't know where Andrew had gone, and that worried me. I called 911 and started to notice the blood pouring down my head. I told the operator I had been attacked and needed an officer and an ambulance. I then called Travis, the manager of the hotel, to tell him what had happened. He thought I was messing with him at first because when we got bored, we would usually prank each other. I finally convinced him I was not joking. So he told me he was heading over straight away. The cops and the ambulance pulled up, and I opened the door. It was at this time I found out that after they sucker punched him and knocked him down, Andrew was able to amazingly jump over the desk and escape. He ran out just as a cop was driving by, which he ran to flag down for help. I ended up in the hospital emergency room, where I had to have 10 staples in my scalp, and they gave me morphine for pain. I had no way to get home after being treated, but the doctor and nurses took pity on me and paid for a cab. My plan was to go back to work because this was December and Christmas was coming. I had 3 kids and needed all the hours I could get. When I got back to the hotel, the IT guy Ted was there with his wife Barbara, who also worked at the front desk. She was shocked to see me. She thought I would still be in the hospital. I thought I had only been hit in the head once after being punched. But the video which Ted was pulling for the police showed a different story. After I went to the ground, the guy had hit me not just 1 time, but 10 times in total. I kept trying to grab the pipe and get up, for some reason. I do not remember that. I guess I was knocked pretty hard. He kept punching me and hitting me with the pipe until his friend told him that Andrew got away and then got the cops. The 2 of them then ran out. I was given a room at the other hotel. And Ted and Barbara gave me a lift there as I was in no condition to drive due to the morphine. They also gave me a paid week off to heal. They switched me over to the other hotel on the night shift for a month, just in case they were after me in particular. We never found out why they chose to attack me. The police thought it might be a failed strong-arm robbery due to Andrew getting away and me not just going down. Not knowing why they attacked me really shook me up. Even though I was at our other hotel when I came back to work the night shift, I was still nervous. I tensed up every time the door chimed. I couldn't afford to quit. As I said, I had 3 kids I was supporting. They never caught the guys as far as I know. A detective stopped by about 2 months later when I was working the second shift. He showed me several mug shots and asked me if any of them looked familiar. I never got a great look at them as it all happened so fast. I had seen the video, which wasn't the best quality. Even so, 2 of them looked very familiar. I pointed them out, and he asked me how sure I was. I told him honestly, like 85%. He then yelled and asked me if I wanted someone to go to jail for attempted murder on 85%. I was stunned into silence. I was the victim. I was attacked for no reason, and he is yelling at me like it's my fault. I was too busy being attacked to get a good look at them. I no longer work at a hotel on the night shift, and I'm glad, because it's just too dangerous in this area. Night shifts at hotels can be risky, and after my terrifying experience, I decided it was time for a change. For a while, the memories of that night haunted me. The feeling of being so vulnerable, the pain from the attack, and the lingering questions about the attacker's motives all weighed heavily on my mind. But over time, I began to heal, both physically and emotionally. I found a new job with better working hours and conditions, which provided me with the opportunity to spend more time with my kids. The sense of safety and security that had been shattered during that fateful night gradually returned. Life moved on, and I left the hotel industry behind. I learned that sometimes it's necessary to prioritize your well-being over financial concerns. My new job allowed me to support my family while maintaining a more stable work-life balance. I never did find out what motivated the attackers that night. They remained at large, leaving behind a trail of questions and unresolved mysteries. However, I chose not to dwell on the past, but to look forward to a brighter future. Though the scars on my scalp served as a physical reminder of that harrowing night, they also symbolized my resilience and ability to overcome adversity. It was a chapter of my life that had come to an end, and I was determined to write a new, safer, and happier story for myself and my family. I need to preface this by saying that I don't believe in ghosts or any other kind of paranormal activity. This is not an attempt to convince people of their existence. What I will say is that I have an open mind regarding things that I can't explain using logic or reasoning. I know something happened to me, I just don't know what. And nothing I've heard so far has come anywhere near a satisfactory explanation. But then, that's what had me creeped out about it. If I could just chalk it up to seeing a ghost or witnessing a glitch in the matrix, as I've heard people call it, or any of that, at least I could draw a line under it and move on. But I can't. Because I have no idea what happened that night, and neither does anyone else. I used to work for a security company that contracted overnight work for large office buildings in downtown Houston. Some of the buildings were real nice places, and their security offices had all kinds of amenities that others just didn't have. The only problem was they made for some of the most boring overnight shifts you could possibly imagine. Tough guards can be exhausting and dangerous, but boredom is a different kind of poison altogether. So you understand what I say, out of all the places that I could have expected my scariest night working security, these places didn't get anywhere near the top 10. One of the buildings we worked in had a bunch of different offices on each floor with a layout, each one being shaped like a letter U. Each of the floors was owned by a different company for the most part. Anyway, so most had a different design but the same layout, and part of that layout were those polished metal plates that sat on the corner of each corridor. They were positioned at the 90-degree angles in the U shape. At first, I figured it was just an odd design choice. Then I figured out that they were like mirrors. If someone was walking down the connecting corridor and you couldn't see them, you'd be able to see a little movement in the polished metal so you wouldn't run into anyone or get a fright. Kind of clever, right? Well, listen to this. One night, I'm working the overnight shift with 2 other coworkers. When it comes my turn to perform a physical sweep of the building, we had most of the building mapped out with cameras, but no security guard worth his salt relies on electronics. So every half hour, one of the guards would take a quick walk around each of the floors just to make sure everything was A-okay. Most of the guys would just take elevators up and down, but it was around this time that I decided to take the stairs a few times a night to get some exercise. I was a few pounds heavier than I wanted to be, and walking up even 5 or 6 flights of stairs sucked. So I took as many flights as I could, then took the elevator the rest of the way. It also helped kill time on those hellish shifts. Anyway, this one time, I managed to hustle all the way up to the 9th floor, which was totally a new record for me. But I was completely out of gas. I literally had to lean against the wall to catch my breath, making sure to stay in the stairwell's blind spots so my coworkers wouldn't watch and laugh at me. Once I had myself together again, I walked out into the corridor and towards the first bend in the U-shaped layout that I mentioned earlier. As I got within a few feet of it, I froze. For the first time in the whole time that I'd worked there, I saw a reflection in the polished metal mirror thing. It wasn't crystal clear, but it was absolutely different to how it usually looked. I had the usual reflected image ingrained into my memory because I saw it hundreds of times a night. I could clearly see someone standing in the connecting hallway, wearing what looked to be the same kind of security uniform as me. I called out, thinking it was one of my coworkers. Then the white shirt shape suddenly moved out of sight. Now, right away, I thought this was a prank. I caught them trying to scare me. So, as I'm walking around the corners, I'm kind of calling out, "Hey, I know you're there. I saw you in the reflection." I get around each corner, but I don't see anyone. I assume the guy had ducked into one of the conference rooms or offices as a backup. I checked all of them, and they were all empty. I called down on my radio to make sure someone was really up there with me and they're just hiding in a closet or something because they're a bunch of immature idiots. The second I heard both guys talking on the same radio, I felt myself getting just a little bit freaked out. Either I was having some kind of weird episode after power walking up those 9 flights, where my eyes were playing tricks on me, or something very bad was happening. So, naturally, I'm starting to get a little worried. Not majorly worried, just a little. I decided to take the elevator the rest of the way. I was still concerned about my health, but then as I'm walking back towards it, something happened that makes me feel cold just to think about to this day. It felt like someone walked up behind me, and it felt like it was fast. I heard the footsteps that definitely weren't my own, and I felt that feeling of imminent danger you get when someone rushes you from behind. I turned, had my hand on my sidearm, ready to defend myself. But there was nothing there. Just an empty corridor with me standing in it. I can't even really think of the words for the kind of fear that I was feeling in that moment. The best that I can come up with is it was like a physical force, and that fear hit me and pushed me towards the elevator at a speed walk. I was convinced that someone was up there with me. But at the same time, they either had to be psychic or a ninja to rush up on me like that, or at least make me feel like I was being creeped on. None of it made any sense, and more, I was thinking that there was something wrong with me, not that something weird was going on. Once I was safely in the elevator, I called down to my coworkers and asked them to watch all of the cameras on the 10th floor for any kind of movement. They replied, asking if I was all good or if I needed help, probably because they could hear the state I was in. But I told them to shut up, watch the cameras, and tell me if they could see anything or anyone. I was expecting a no, in which case I had to accept that I was having some kind of medical emergency and maybe even call 911. I heard about people having strokes or heart attacks and how they can feel confused or panicked, so that's all my hypochondriac mind was thinking about. But then, as my radio crackled to life again, I heard the next thing they said, and I swear to Christ that I felt like I was going to throw up. My coworker came back with, "Yeah, there's someone up there with you. We're headed for the elevator right now." I sent it down to the ground floor, and if I'm being honest, I was weirdly relieved. I wasn't about to have a stroke, and I wasn't going crazy. There really was someone up on the 10th floor, and they were about to get messed up for scaring the living daylights out of me. We swept all the rooms together, calling out to this potential intruder the whole time, saying things like, "Come on out, and you're only getting trespassing," and even saying things like, "This is a heck of a way to get yourself shot." We were just bluffing, and it wasn't a huge issue that we didn't find this intruder. They could have easily used the stairwell to escape to another floor. But instead of going and hunting them down, we just headed back down to the security office, watched the cameras, and waited for the real cops to show up. On the way back to the office, I asked my coworker what exactly he'd seen on those security cameras, and it turns out he hadn't seen anything definitive, just enough blurry movement on the edges of a monitor to know that someone was definitely up there. And they seemed like they knew where the camera's blind spots were. This is what really sent alarm bells ringing for my coworkers. Stuff like that suggests someone has cased the place, done a little recon in the daytime, possibly disguised as a client or employee. They'd know where to go to get whatever they come for, as well as how to get there without being spotted straight away. A lot of people have asked me how this person could have gotten into the building in the first place, and didn't that bother me at all? The question did bother me, but we're not trained to waste time thinking about how. We're trained to react to intruders as and when they occur, to focus on either locking them down for the cops or getting them out of the building without anyone getting hurt. You focus on the how afterward. In the moment, you focus on the intruder. Anyway, we watched the cameras, called the cops, and tried to work out where this intruder could have gotten to, while avoiding all the security cameras. We stared at the cameras for maybe 15 to 20 minutes before the cops showed up, and we didn't see any movement. When the cops arrived, we helped them sweep all the floors and offices to make sure no one was around. They were pretty thorough about it, opening up closets and checking under desks. But still, we found no one. Even the cops said that it must have been spooky for whoever was up there alone, which sounded like the understatement of the century. But right then, when we were dealing with the situation, I was sure that it wasn't just me going nuts. The situation was resolving itself, so I was relatively calm again. When the cops left, we switched on the alarm systems for floors 9 to 13, meaning if anyone entered those floors again, we'd be instantly alerted, and a 911 call would automatically be issued. No alarms were triggered that night, so we figured the episode was pretty much over and done with. We'd have to talk to the head of security about it, and there was no doubt that he'd be very interested in how he let something like that happen. But no one expected to get fired. In the weeks afterward, I realized how much the experience had affected me. The longer I went on wondering about it, the worse the feeling got. I thought I had put it behind me, but it turned out to be a major error in judgment on my part. Or maybe I just ignored my feelings. I thought about what could have made those noises and reflections. What could have given me that feeling like someone was rushing up behind me? After thinking about it for long enough, I decided that I didn't want to work there anymore. When I was told that I couldn't pick and choose which guard shifts I was on, I was left with no choice but to seek employment elsewhere. I'm not afraid to admit that I was scared of whatever happened up there. Rather than going down some crazy rabbit hole trying to explain it, I thought it was better just to walk away and start fresh someplace else. It's never happened again, nor anything like it, but you can bet your bottom dollar that if it does, I'm out of there. A couple of years ago, I was living in Colombo, in Sri Lanka, at a small hostel on the outskirts of the city. The hostel catered to long-term guests, so I got to know everyone who lived there pretty well. Among the residents, there was a guy named Raj, and Raj served as a middleman of sorts in the local casinos. The casinos in the area were incredibly shady places, filled with Russian mobsters and other low-life criminals from China and India. While the casinos were technically illegal, they managed to continue their operations through bribery and government coercion. I visited one of them once, and it was a surreal experience. Now, my friend Raj's job was to take online bets from Indian clients and then place those bets physically in the casino. Essentially, he played with their money and acted as the intermediary, allowing individuals to play from another location. He participated in some high-stakes games, handling large sums of money for some powerful people. It was a recipe for disaster waiting to happen. One night, Raj messed up big time. One of his clients managed to gain access to his online system and stole all the money his other clients had deposited to play with. The amount stolen was significant, with some losing well over $50,000, a fortune in this area. We only found out about the theft after Raj's sudden disappearance, and we discovered a cryptic note left in his bed, saying, "It's sad, don't look for me, I'm leaving." Among other things. The guy had vanished overnight. We filed a police report and waited to hear anything. After a few days, the police returned to the hostel, asking if someone who knew Raj could join them. The locals in the hostel were afraid to go with the police, so I volunteered. They took me to their headquarters, leading me to the back where I was shown photos of a body cut into pieces. It was Raj, brutally dismembered and dumped into the nearby sewer canal by an unknown assailant. They brought me there to identify the body, but they never found out who was responsible for this gruesome act. The images from those photos have haunted me, and I'll never forget them. I left the hostel shortly afterward. Raj might have been involved in some shady activities, but he didn't deserve such a gruesome fate. I work as a baker for a small bakery in a tourist town. I'm regularly at work around midnight most nights. I'm pretty close to the local strip of bars and clubs, so I hear late-night partygoers, sirens a few times a night, and people yelling. That kind of stuff. The weirdest story, which started out creepy but didn't end that way, was when I opened the door around 4 a.m. to someone knocking. The only reason I opened the door is because my boss had literally just texted me, saying we might be getting an early delivery, so I thought it was that. I opened the door, and no one's there. I glanced around, thinking they knocked, and ran back to their truck to start unloading. Then suddenly, someone steps out of the shadows, looking like Slender Man. I panic but hold it together pretty well. Once they got out of the shadows, it obviously wasn't a monster. It was just a tall, skinny girl with no pants on, no shoes, and a shirt that obviously wasn't hers. This poor girl then asks me if she can borrow a phone. It clicks in my mind what could have happened, and I tell her to come in. I let her use my phone. She tries to call her boyfriend and tells me that essentially she just woke up after passing out. She didn't know where she was, and I was the only light on the street. I didn't ask what happened to her, but she was saying something about pulling a firearm earlier and was hyperventilating over the cops being called on her, so I didn't call them. Her boyfriend never answered the phone, but I helped her figure out where her hotel was. Luckily, it was on the same block we were already on. I couldn't leave to walk with her or drive because I had a million things in the oven. I actually gave her my phone with the place pulled up on Google Maps and the flashlight on. She walked there, made it back okay, showered, took a nap, and brought me back my phone later in the morning. She hugged me twice and thanked me profusely, and I'm just sitting there like, damn, I didn't think I was getting my phone back. But I'm glad it worked out okay. I don't know if she was assaulted or just the type to strip when drunk or what, but she seemed okay after having been back to her hotel room. It could have gone a lot worse for her, so I'm glad I was the door she knocked on. God, did she give me a heart attack at first? A few years back when I was doing any work I could get, I took up this gig at the 24/7 Walmart. It was a bit more rundown than your typical Walmart. Dimly lit aisles, flickering fluorescent lights, and an eeriness that only an empty Walmart at 3 in the morning can provide. So picture this, I'm stocking shelves in the cereal aisle, just trying to keep myself awake with the monotonous routine. And then, out of nowhere, this guy saunters in. He's tall, I mean basketball player tall, with long strides that make him seem like he's on some sort of mission. There's hardly anyone around, and this dude's pacing down the aisles like he owns the place. Kind of weird, but not out of the ordinary Walmart weird. Just a late night shopper with a peculiar vibe. I'm busy stacking cereal boxes when I catch sight of him again. He's standing at the end of the aisle, staring at me with this grin that could send shivers down your spine. The lighting's wonky, casting these creepy shadows that don't help my nerves. Before I can even process what's happening, he's right there, right in front of me. Close enough that I can smell the alcohol on his breath. He shoots me this look, like he's got the juiciest secret in the world, and then he says, "I've done something very naughty." What the hell? I try to laugh it off, brush it away with a nervous chuckle. But he's not having it. He keeps staring, that grin still plastered on his face. It's late, it's quiet, and the place is kind of creepy already. But this guy, he's turned it up to 10. He starts following me, aisle after aisle. Every time I turn around, there he is, watching and grinning. It's like he's playing a twisted game of hide and seek, and I'm not even a player. More like the unwilling target. I try to go about my work, but I can feel his eyes on me, like they're drilling holes into my back. Then, out of nowhere, he starts humming this tune. It's faint, just under his breath, but it's off-putting as hell. I can't put my finger on where I've heard it before, but it's that famously creepy whistling song. I decide to take a breather and head to the break room. Maybe I can shake him off and catch a few moments of normalcy. My coworker's in there, and we're shooting the breeze about assignments and exams, trying to keep things light. But the whole time, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. And guess what? I was right. I spot him at the entrance to the break room, just standing there, staring right at me. I freeze, and I swear the room got colder in that moment. I point him out to my coworker, and when he turns around, the guy's vanished. I glance at my coworker. I couldn't read his expression. I ask him, "Did you see that?" He looks at me. The confusion is obvious in his eyes. See what? Clearly he saw nothing. I realize that he missed the entire encounter. It was only me who saw him. I run my fingers through my hair, feeling a mixture of paranoia and frustration. "Never mind," I mutter, dismissing the topic. Maybe I'm just letting my imagination get the best of me. It was late and I'd not slept properly in days. My coworker's not as intrigued as I am. He's focused on the task at hand, more interested in getting his work done than in delving into whatever nonsense I was talking about. We head back to our posts, and I'm still rattled. I can't shake the image of that guy's grin. Hours pass, and I try my best to concentrate on my tasks, but the unease is a constant presence in the back of my mind. I keep glancing around, half expecting him to reappear. That creepy grin plastered on his face. And then, out of nowhere, he's back. My heart skips a beat, and my hands tremble. It's like a nightmare come true. He's standing there, that same grin on his face. My breath catches in my throat. Before I can even react, he's sprinting towards me, his steps quick and purposeful. Panic surges through me, and I freeze. What does he want? My mind races, but my body's paralyzed. He grabs me and easily picks me up. He starts shaking me and shouting in my face. And then, as if from a distance, I hear a shout. My coworker's voice cuts through the fear. Hey, what's going on? He's running towards us, his footsteps echoing in the aisle. The guy releases his grip on me, his attention shifting to my coworker. And in that split second, I find my voice. I scream as loud as I can and start beating on the guy. My coworker arrives, his presence enough to make the guy hesitate. He turns and bolts, disappearing down the aisle. I'm left shaking, my heart pounding. My coworker rushes to my side, he looks seriously concerned. Are you okay? He asks me. I nod, I'm completely out of breath from the screaming. We're both shaken, both trying to make sense of the madness that just unfolded. We call the police, and as we wait for them to arrive, I can't help but replay the encounter in my mind. What was that guy's deal? Why did he attack me? The police arrive and we recount the bizarre events. They search the area, but the guy is long gone. I tell him what happened and try to describe just how creepy and weird he was, and I mention that he said he'd done something naughty that night. Suddenly there's like 4 more cop cars pulling up, and they're taking this real seriously. My manager sent me home for the night and told me I didn't have to come in tomorrow. I checked the news the next day and saw that there had been a hit and run nearby with a suspected drunk driver killing a family of 3. The description of the suspect was almost exactly the same as the guy who attacked me. What the hell was this guy's problem? As far as I know, they never found him. I check the news occasionally just to see if he comes up, but I've not seen anything since. I've worked a few random jobs in my life. My first one was a summer job at 16 during summer break at a dairy farm. I absolutely hated it there, and it made it harder for me to find the motivation to even try finding work again when the time came. I don't really remember how I was first referred to the job, but the following summer, I ended up working as an office assistant for a self-employed photographer. My parents knew her because she used to be a member of their church, and my sister attended her 4-H program when she had it. By that time, her health had begun to take a hit, as she claimed it was a mixture of things from chronic Lyme to fibromyalgia. I had also been warned by my parents that she was a little off. She was very religious and claimed to have had real encounters with demons, even participated in some exorcisms. I'm an atheist and a skeptic, so I never took her stories seriously. Aside from the weird things she would tell me, she was mostly harmless, and working for her was not very hard. The job basically required me to do a lot of data entry, as well as help prep her photos with some minor editing. She would also make me add her company watermark before uploading them. They'd end up on a site where her customers could browse them and then pick which ones they wanted to order. She primarily photographed horse events, dressage, stadium and cross-country jumping, etc. And for the first several months my job was in her living room, which was basically my office space at the time. Eventually, I was talked into tagging along at shows where she trained me as a photographer, and soon I was shooting at the events along with her. It was boring work, I won't lie. I'm not a horse person. But things didn't get weird until a year later when I learned the hard way it was not her that I needed to worry about. She had 2 sons. One who was out of state, the other who was in the Navy. The latter of the 2, a guy called Nathan, I had only heard small things about. He was somewhere on the autism spectrum, but she was never clear on what exactly his diagnosis was. When he finally returned home and I met him for the first time while working in her living room, he seemed like a nice guy. A little odd, but not concerning. He was obsessed with movies, and being a bit of a movie buff myself, whenever he would venture to the living room to strike up a conversation, it would almost always be about whatever movies we were into or were excited to watch. I should point out here that I was 18 and he was in his mid-30s. At some point, he got it in his head that I was interested in him, though he never said anything directly to me. I had to find out about it from my parents. My mom worked as the secretary at the church, and Nathan somehow found out. I can only guess my boss had told him. One afternoon, Nathan showed up at my mom's desk and started gushing about his feelings. He talked about how much fun I was, how he loved talking to me, how he was planning to take me to the movies and take me to his church, and all these other plans he had for me. My mom was beyond uncomfortable, as was the pastor who happened to overhear it. And when I got home that night, she told me what had happened and suggested I make sure not to lead him on. I was completely baffled because I hadn't done anything. We'd never even discussed the possibility of doing anything together. I got even more uncomfortable around him over the next few weeks. I made an effort to acknowledge him less when he was around and keep the conversation short while stressing I had to do work. Eventually he got his own place and moved out of his parents' house, so I figured the problem had solved itself. A couple years later, I had moved out, my boss's company had closed, and I was working somewhere else. I was friends with both my boss and Nathan on Facebook, and around that time I was finally coming out as an atheist, something I couldn't do while I was still living at home. One night, my old boss messaged me, asking about a ring I had on my finger. It was a black ring with a white solid star in the middle of a black circle. Already knowing where she was going with this, I told her it was just a ring. She started accusing me of wearing a pentagram because she didn't know what a pentacle was and that I was promoting Satan. I tried several times to explain to her that not only was it not that symbol, but that also paganism has nothing to do with the devil anyways, but she refused to listen, so I just ignored her. It was typical behavior of her and not worth the argument. The next morning, I had a message from Nathan telling me I needed to come to his church with him. I told him no, and the messages I received back gradually grew angrier and angrier. He went from asking to demanding I go with him. He told me I was lost and that I would not find the answers I needed by living the life I was. Eventually he outright said he thought the fact that I was wearing a pentagram was disgusting and that I was opening myself up for possession. Knowing there would be even less of a point in arguing with him than there was with his mother, I went ahead and blocked both of them, deciding I was done with it all. Then he started showing up at my workplace. He would always search through the store until he found me, and then once he did, he would corner me and not stop talking to me no matter how many times I tried to dodge him or tell him I needed to get back to work. Eventually the managers caught on and started intercepting him whenever he showed up. I wasn't making enough to pay the rent with that job, so I had to take up a second one. Within a week of working my second job, which was in a different town, he started showing up there. This time I told the managers who he was, and after that, every time he showed up, I was allowed to hide in the back room behind a locked door while they sped his order along and got him out. One of those many encounters, while I was hiding in the back, one of the managers was back there with me, inputting employee time punches into the computer when the both of us heard Nathan shout in our direction. "I know you remember me." That was the last straw for them, and they told him his business was no longer welcome there. He stopped showing up at my other job as well for a while. Fast forward to a few years later, I was getting used to not having to look over my shoulder every shift or check the parking lot for his truck. Then one day, he reappeared. He was browsing a section I was walking past when he spotted me and got this deer in the headlights look. I made a beeline to the break room because just seeing him made me scared. After that, he started showing up regularly. I would always find ways to dodge and avoid him, but he would still eventually spot me and know I was still there. I was debating whether or not to tell the managers, because at this point it had been a while since he had done anything, and saying something just because I was nervous didn't feel right. Call me a coward or an idiot, but that was my thought process. What happened next made me regret not speaking up. It was bound to happen eventually, but one night he managed to catch me while I was at the customer service desk. He approached me and said hi, and I immediately started to look for someone to signal over so I could make a break for it. But before I could say a word, he said something that made me feel sick. "How's your little girl doing?" "She's 3, right?" I looked at him, horrified. I had him completely blocked from all of my social media. I had his number blocked. I was living at a new address, and I had not seen or spoken to his mother since she confronted me about my ring. I had not told either of them I was a parent now, or that I was married, and I was not friends with anyone who knew them. "How's your husband doing?" "He's good." "He's a good man," I said, trying to reinforce the idea that I was not available to him and that I had no desire to have anything to do with him. "Really? Where does he work?" At this point, I felt like I was going to pass out. Thankfully, another employee approached, and I got the hell out of there. As I was leaving, he called out behind me. "I'll see you again. We'll talk. We'll go out and do something together." "We will." I reported him to the managers, telling them everything about the encounter, including all the information that he should not have had. They were able to pull up his face on CCTV, and while I have not heard anything, I'm guessing one of them finally managed to approach him because I haven't seen him since. This has been going on for 10 years and I want it to finally be over. If he shows up again, I'm going to the police, but I'm seriously hoping it never comes to that. I just want him to stop. I haven't seen him since the incident with my managers. I think he may have gotten scared off. Turned out one of my coworkers used to work with him too at a different job, and she also made a complaint about him to the managers. I don't know what they did with that information afterwards, but I know he hasn't shown up since. It sounds like they plan to call the cops if he sets foot in the store again. With 2 employee complaints of stalker-like behavior, they refuse to ignore that. In 2002, I was 14 years old, starting freshman year. I was an awkward, nerdy girl that didn't know how to handle attention from boys, so you could say I made things worse for my situation. I had a knack for making friends with the weird people no one liked, but I tried to be friendly with everyone I met, so it wasn't a big deal to me. Unfortunately, that was also my downfall. Clubs were a big deal, and they actually had an anime club, so of course I was all about that. First club meeting, I sat next to a couple of friends and soaked it all up. I thought I was finally with my people. Then here comes Stalker Kid. I'd use his real name, but to this day I have no clue what it is. He sat in front of me, and being that person, I said hi. I could tell he was uncomfortable and didn't know anyone, so I was just being nice. And boy, did this guy cling to me for that one word. At first, he would just find me during lunch and just stand there mumbling things to me. He had such a soft voice, high-pitched, mousy little guy, that you just felt unnerved when he spoke to you. The way he would look at you as he spoke, I could never look him in the eyes. After a while, it became more asking about my personal life and what I was into. Me being dumb and naive, I tried to be friendly and chat while feeling incredibly uncomfortable. After a while, me and my friends would move to different tables, benches, even hallways to avoid him, but he always found me. After about a year of this, my best friend finally told me that if I didn't tell him to F off, he would. I really didn't want him around anymore, so, sure, go ahead. So one day during lunch, here comes Stalker Kid with his signature greeting. Barely above a whisper. "Hey Nancy." My buddy just goes, "Dude, she's not interested, F off." Looking hurt, he shuffled away. I was like, man, you didn't have to be so hard on him, but thanks. I didn't see him much around school after that except for club days where he would just sit across the room and stare at me while my best friend glared at him. Cut to me being 16 and now driving to school. Minus the awkward club days, I didn't really notice anything from him. That is until an old gray beat-up car started parking next to me, extremely close. One day after school, he was waiting for me in that car. He started asking me how I've been, talking about prom and all that stuff. I was trying to rack my brain on how he knew that was my car, unless he had been watching me before and after school. I started getting there later and leaving later to avoid him because he was like clockwork. Finally, a boy I used to be friends with in elementary school was walking out with me and made a comment about how that guy is always next to my car and asked if he was my boyfriend. I immediately said no, and he's always following me around, and I hated it. It was really starting to freak me out. Bless this guy, because he walked right up to him and scared him off, threatening if he ever parked near me again he would kick his ass. I figured maybe that was enough to keep him away. So again, there was a small space where I would hear nothing of him except for my friends who had classes with him telling me how creepy he was. One friend had art class with him and said he would draw naked women constantly in his books. Junior year is wrapping up, and I started giving my best friend Jack lifts to school. He was on my way, so I figured why not. At some point, Jack started noticing that little gray car was always heading the same way after school and made a joke about stalker kid living next to him. Small world, right? I could only be so lucky. One day, as per usual, little gray car was following us, so we took a detour. Sure enough, he was with us every step of the way, and it was no longer a joke. We both started freaking out. I pushed the gas pedal as hard as my foot could push it and got the hell out of sight. A few other things happened. In order to get into prom, he had to ask someone from my year. So he asked some random girl from my softball team and then dumped her as soon as he got in. He then followed me all night. This includes to the after prom, where I had to avoid him the whole time. Our high school had a TV channel for kids to run, and during prom they would record the whole night. It took one of my friends to point it out, but throughout the whole video, it showed him behind me and following and staring at me all night. I didn't even realize. And the one that still creeps me out to this day is graduation for his class. I was scanning the crowd to see my friends who were graduating when I saw a hand wave as I passed by. I looked back, and of course it was stalker kid waving at me. How he picked me out of a crowd of thousands I will never know. 2006 senior year was great, no signs of creepy stalker kid, to the point where I kind of forget about him. I graduate, I choose a college in town, get a job at a local retail store and move on. Life was beginning to be normal. I work the gaming department, so you get the weird guys once in a while. One that I saw a lot was this little Mexican guy with glasses who never purchased anything but would just walk around from time to time. Then, stalker kid comes strolling in the doors and walks into gaming and just talks. I ask how he knew I worked here. He says his friend saw me and knew we were friends. I tried to radio for help for someone to come and get him out. Finally, a big guy from computers walks by and asks for my help in the back. Once he pulls me to safety, I tell him everything. From that point, security is aware and is told to watch for this guy. Of course, he wasn't doing anything physical, so all they could do for me is watch out for him. So every time he came in, they would tell me and I would dip back to the warehouse. I started seeing his friend, who he called Ninja, constantly, and all he ever did was walked around on his phone. I began to suspect he was texting stalker kid to tell him I was at work, because sure enough, 10 minutes later, he would come in. So I tested this theory and started walking randomly around the store. At one point, a friend who worked register asked why I would do this, so I had her take a walk with me on her break. I told her this ninja guy would follow us everywhere, even just going down a random aisle. Sure enough, he did, and she began freaking out. A few minutes later, I told her my stalker would walk through those doors. So I'm making my way to the warehouse, and out steps Ninja Guy from an aisle and he shouts, "She's right here." I just stared at him, like, what the hell do you think you're doing? Stalker Kid walks up behind me and asks why I'm always running away from him, and says that he lost my number, and asks if I can give it to him again. I say sure, knowing damn well that I never gave it to him. I go to the warehouse to get a pen and paper. I wrote down, "This is where I work, don't ever come here again," and handed it to him. I told him and his friend to leave and called for security, who walked him out. Security tells me later that he also cried while they took him out. Later that day, as I'm leaving work, security offers to walk me to my car. I say sure. Stalker Kid is out by my car waiting for me, so this is where security says he's not having it, and calls the police, which we are conveniently next to their headquarters. He books it when he sees the car. Few years go by, nothing comes up. I buy a fancy new car and don't see him much. I'm thinking that did the trick, and I'm finally free. 2012, my buddies and I are leaving work, ready to hit the night at the bar, per usual. We are all walking out the door, where we all have to stand and wait to hear the alarm sound to verify it's armed. As we are walking out, I hear it. That awful sound. "Hey Nancy." I cringe, grab my friend's arm and turn. There he is leaning on his car, waiting. My friend recognizes him and asks what he wants. Guy says he just wants to talk to me. He said he didn't ever see my car, so he didn't think I worked here anymore. His other friend is sitting in the back seat of his car just staring at me blankly. I start to think the worst. If my friends leave me here, something tells me I'm not coming into work the next day. Or ever. I'm terrified that he's had years of time to think about our last encounter where I wrote my number down and made him cry. I grab my friend's arm tighter. My friend kicks off, pretends to be my boyfriend and rips into him. My friend is about 2 feet taller and much bigger. They get into it, and I'm just standing in the parking lot and I'm just begging for my friend to kick his ass. He spooked Stalker Kid so bad that I'm pretty sure he pissed himself before getting in his car and booking it. Ever since, if he comes into the store, my friend stares him down from his office. Years later, I've moved on, gotten married, and moved out of town. Recently we've moved back to start a business, and to this day, I still feel myself looking behind me at stores on the off chance that I randomly bump into him. He caused me to have anxiety, mental and emotional pain, fear and trust issues for a decade. Even after moving on, I still feel the effects today. And I never even knew his name. I'll begin by giving a little background. At the time this happened, I was a 16-year-old girl working at a chain coffee place while in high school. I am 19 now, and in college, 7 hours away from this place. This happened at a time in my life in which I was super shy and had a tough time standing up for myself. In retrospect, I could have handled it a lot better. I used to work closing shifts with my best friend after school. It'd be from like 3 to 10 p.m. We worked at a relatively dead store, so we spent most of our time playing music and talking. We did our duties like taking the trash out and restocking, etc., although both of us always dreaded taking the trash out, as we had to go out back. The dumpsters were behind the store, in a dimly lit area, next to a sketchy liquor store. One night a man came in pretty late. It wasn't unusual to have customers come near closing, it was just uncommon to see anyone we didn't already know. Our store was mostly just regulars. He was lanky, and probably around 30. I mostly just remember his eyes. They were piercing, the type that never break a stare. I remember initially thinking he was attractive. Yikes. The way he spoke was short and concise, just ordering a small hot latte. I made his order and that was it. I told my friend about how I thought he was attractive, and we then started referring to him as the small hot latte guy. We always called people by their drink orders. He came a bunch of times after that, each time staying a little longer and longer, talking a little more and more. One day he came with a woman, presumably his girlfriend. I remember I felt a little weird, like she was staring at me, or like they had spoken about me beforehand. She glanced over at him and said, "Wow, she is pretty." I didn't think much of it, said thank you, served them, and I thought that would be the end of it. He then began showing up and talking to me a lot without her. He started off as being friendly. I honestly don't even know what we talk about. Then he got kind of flirty. Initially I was just flattered, but being underage and immature, I didn't even think about the fact that it was kind of alarming. He began to stay for a while. Sometimes he would bring a laptop or a notebook. I could feel him staring at me and listening to our conversations. But at that point I wasn't getting creepy vibes from him, as my coworker and I had dealt with our fair share of creeps. He began by just giving little snacks or drinks. I would accept, but would never eat or drink them. It wasn't that I necessarily thought he had ill intentions, I just had a hard time accepting gifts. I remember one night he brought me a book about one of his favorite artists. I reluctantly took it, but had tried to decline before. I remember telling him about one of my favorite musicians and sent him a link to a performance I really liked. He started being kind of sexual while still talking about the song. He then began talking super suggestively, and I would laugh it off and decline when he asked to send pictures. I began talking less and less and told my friend about the situation. She agreed that it was getting creepy and said I should maybe change my schedule. I told her I'd be fine, I'm stubborn. He'd still come every week at closing time, and he'd even stay in his car till we closed. Meaning he'd watch me go to the back to take the trash out. It was time to take out the trash and lock up, so we got ourselves together. I was opening the door while juggling like 3 bags of trash and saw something on the ground. I was confused at first, but then realized what I saw. It was flowers and a note. I felt sick to my stomach and looked around the parking lot. I didn't see his car. I threw them away immediately and told my friend I didn't want to read the note. She read it and told me I had to. It was something to the effect of, "I've never felt so connected to someone. You're breaking my heart. Please don't do this. I'm sorry." Looking back, I honestly didn't lead him on, but initially I felt as if I was in the wrong. Nonetheless, we turned the corner to take the trash out and both prayed the parking lot was empty. It was not. Let's just say the trash was not going to get taken out that night. I continued working there and still worked there on my breaks from college. I had different hours after that. Nothing happened for some time until one day he appeared again, just before I was supposed to leave for college. It was around 3 p.m. It was busy. He came in, stared at me, and then he left. That was the last time I saw him. Looking back, I was so naive and could have handled the situation so much better. I am forever thankful to my friend. She really supported me that whole time. A year ago, I used to post my entire life to Snapchat. It was my go-to app for sharing bits of my life with friends and family. But then something happened that made me reconsider my online presence. One day, out of the blue, I received a friend request from an unfamiliar username. I didn't think much of it at the time and accepted the request without a second thought. It was just another random person, or so I assumed. Months passed, and I forgot about that peculiar friend request. My life went on, and I continued sharing snippets of my daily activities on Snapchat. Little did I know that someone was watching, very closely. It started innocently enough, with an unexpected snap. I opened it, thinking it was probably a friend sharing a funny meme or a cute pet photo. But as the image loaded, my heart almost stopped. It was an eerie, edited version of an old Snapchat story I had posted months ago. Floating love hearts surrounded the image, and the caption read, "Can't wait to see you." The chill running down my spine was hard to ignore. How did someone get access to my old stories? Who was behind this? Days turned into weeks, and more edited snaps kept arriving. Each one featured pictures taken from my past stories. The captions became increasingly unsettling, referring to my personal life. "How was your McDonald's on Friday?" And another said, "I loved that movie you watched last night." The sense of being watched was inescapable. I felt exposed and vulnerable, as though a stranger had invaded my privacy. It wasn't long before I decided to check Snap Maps, the feature that lets you see the real-time locations of your friends. My heart raced as I zoomed in on the map. There it was, a bit too close for comfort, the location of this creep. He was nearby, and the thought sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary prank or trolling. It felt personal, like someone was playing mind games with me. Fear gripped me as I realized the mysterious friend was getting closer to my location. I knew I had to act fast. I began taking screenshots of the disturbing snaps for evidence. Then, I contacted the local authorities and reported the unsettling situation. The investigation that followed uncovered the identity of the creep. To my shock, it turned out to be someone I met at a party months ago. I'd been warned about how creepy and weird he was. He would just invite himself to parties and nobody wanted to be rude and kick him out, so we just tolerated him. To be fair, I had no issue with him and spoke with him a little bit throughout the night, but didn't see much of him. I guess being nice to the social outcast when everyone else kept him at arm's length was enough for him to become obsessed with me. They didn't end up charging him with anything, but they told him to leave me alone and explained to me that I could get a restraining order, but I didn't see the point. This happened a couple of months ago, December of last year. I started working a new job in the mall and had to work for most of Boxing Day. I was done at 10 and transit seemed to have ended at 7. I'm a student who didn't go home for the holidays due to this job and never had to deal with holiday transit hours. I decided to call an Uber and the driver picked me up right in front of the mall. We had a casual conversation during the drive back and he learned about where I worked and how I'm living on my own for the time being since my roommates went to their hometowns. Fast forward to the next day at work, around 6 p.m. This driver walks into the store and tries to strike a conversation with me, but I told him I had to get back to work. He also asked if we could hang out later, to which I said no, and he left. At the end of that shift, I walked out of the store, planning to take transit. As soon as I stepped out of the store, the driver immediately pulled up next to me and offered to give me a free ride back home. After going back and forth with me declining and him saying it's free, I decided to walk away and caught a bus home. I was pretty overwhelmed by the fact that he showed up to my workplace and waited 3 hours until I was done with work to offer me a ride home. I've reported this to Uber and they notified me that they suspended this driver, provided me with a full refund and gave me a link to provide to the police if I plan on filing a report. Silly of me to give away information like that to a stranger, but I hope to never meet that driver again. He was about twice my age, he knows where my home is, and my name. Lesson learned.